And joining us now is Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. He is the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, there's conflicting information this morning about whether the U.S. delegation is on the way to Islamabad. Some of this confusion from the president himself. Do you have any insight about where negotiations stand at this point? What have you been briefed upon about the status of these talks?
Yeah, well, from what I've heard, the talks are nowhere near where the president thinks they are. And I think the biggest problem is throughout this process, throughout his presidency, President Trump does not tell the truth. He spends and says things he thinks are to his advantage, or sometimes he just lies, I think, for the sake of it. But he's not been honest about where the negotiations are. What was it, 3 days ago now? The president said that Iran had agreed to all of our terms, when that was very clearly not true. Exactly why the president chooses to do this is up for a lot of debate. I guess the hope is he can sort of talk it into existence, but it's very clear the negotiations are not where he has said they are. So we need a reboot on this. How do we get to a diplomatic conversation with Iran? Based on available evidence, I would think it quite likely that Iran will not show up and negotiate, because what they've said about where negotiations are at has turned out to be a lot closer to the truth than anything coming out of the White House.
So you believe Iran over the White House?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would put it exactly the way I just put it, which is, given the history, given what Trump has said about where the negotiations are at, and given what's actually played out, if Iran says they're not showing up, it's not a matter of believing them on some, fundamental policy issue. Iran says they're not going to show up. It seems likely they're not going to show up. But that's not the biggest point. The biggest point is, even if they do show up, what is the negotiation going to lead to? We have our demands: no nuclear program, no ballistic missile program, no support for terrorists, open the Strait of Hormuz. Thus far, Iran's response has been, we will do none of those things. In exchange, you need to give us a lot of money to pay for the damage that this war has caused. So the negotiations, regardless of who you think you believe or don't believe, they are very, very far apart. And step one is trying to at least get it closer to where an actual substantive conversation could take place.
Do you know if the U.S. delegation is, in fact, en route to Pakistan for these talks that were set by the U.S. for tomorrow, and whether the vice president is part of that?
I don't. But I imagine that part is true. I imagine that we're headed over there. And look, it's not inconceivable that in the next 24 hours, Iran will change their mind and show up. I mean, that's possible, like I said. But again, right now they're saying they won't. And, on something that simple, you have to take them at their word. It's not like I'm believing Iran that they're a peace-loving nation. I'm believing Iran when they say that they're not going to be somewhere. But again, the thing we really need to focus on is, if and when they do show up, what is a pathway out of this conflict? And it's very clear President Trump still today has no better idea how he's going to get out of this than he did when he got into it.
How big of an escalation was the Navy seizure of that Iranian cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty sizable escalation, because it was enforcing the blockade. Whether or not Iran's going to do anything, I don't know. I do understand the president's point of view on that. Up the pressure to try to force Iran to change their position, to get them to change, as I suggested, that someone needs to in order to get to an end. There's just not a lot of evidence that it's going to have that impact on Iran. As your previous guests outlined, Iran is dug in and they're willing to absorb a lot of pain. How do we deal with that? Yes, we can pound the table and say it shouldn't be this way. Iran is wrong. They should not be doing this. They should change their position. Okay, we can say that. But that doesn't make Iran change. We need actual policy ideas for how to get us to a better place than we are right now.
On social media yesterday, the president renewed his threats to, quote, knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran if a deal is not reached before the negotiated 2-week ceasefire is up, which is, again, supposed to be tomorrow night. He called it his honor. We are now less than 48 hours from that deadline. Is Congress prepared to step in and stop the U.S. from targeting civilian infrastructure, which experts say would be committing a war crime?
I am. I think a lot of us in Congress are. Thus far, the Republican Party has not been willing to do anything to rein in the president's war power. We don't have the votes, but yes, we should step in, and we should be clear. All this talk about, well, sometimes civilian infrastructure is connected to the military, and therefore it is a legitimate target. That is true. It's also not what the president is talking about. The president is talking about, killing off an entire civilization and blowing up every single bridge and every single power plant. That is very clearly targeting civilian infrastructure. Number one, it is a war crime. Number two, it undermines our credibility and leverage in the world in terms of what we're legitimately trying to accomplish in this conflict. We are legitimately trying to stop Iran from supporting terrorist groups, building a nuclear weapon, and building ballistic missile capacity. If we start talking about ending a civilization, it's a war crime. It kills our credibility. And also, Iran has sort of shown that they're willing to stand up to those threats, and they are unbowed by those threats. So they don't accomplish anything but put us in a worse position.